I just feel a bit cheated sometimes when that happens.
I think it's not necessarily...
I'm like, you lied to me again. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Popcorn Club. This week we went to go and see the Imitation Game.
It is the tale of Alan Turing, the man who cracked the Enigma code during World War II and was a renowned computer scientist, or kind of almost the father of modern computing in a lot of ways. And yeah, it centres mostly around the period during World War II at Bletchley Park with him and his team of people.
His crack team of scientists and code breakers.
Briefly touches on him as a child at school, and then also just prior to his suicide, spoiler alert, in the 50s.
So it sort of jumps between those three across the whole film. What did you think? Good things, bad things? Where do you want to start?
A combination of good and bad in ways that I'm still trying to come to terms with. Jumping from time period to time period, I think that kind of let the film down. Starting with the police investigation, and every time it cut back to either that or his school days, I think it really took the momentum out of the film.
Yeah, the real thrill tale is this, desperately trying to crack the code to win the war and this sort of stuff, and that's
a lot of the code breaking stuff. Is really interesting, but kind of just centered around Benedict Cumberbatch's performance, which I think is kind of great, and he captures the whole sort of tortured soul really well. But kind of all the other characters around it, to me, felt really, really kind of one note and kind of basic. I think it's a really hugely interesting story to tell. I think 2 hours just isn't enough justice to get everything in. I think especially if they pay lip service to the pre-war and post-war periods, and there seems to be so much shorthand going on, and a lot of the other characters feel fairly stock and fairly archetypal in a way that just doesn't feel real. And it's because it's such an interesting and such an important story. I kind of felt like there wasn't just enough depth to the film itself, or what was happening around it. It didn't feel real enough. A lot of the misunderstanding of Alan Turing's character between the Charles Dance's character, the rest of his team, is all kind of played for laughs in a way that I just didn't ring true. It was kind of funny watching it, and maybe I wouldn't have so much of a problem with it in a different film. But I think in this film, it just didn't sit right with me.
So that's interesting, because my take, I didn't so much have that issue with it. The story is really, really important. I think Alan Turing was an absolutely fascinating man with a important story to tell, because he was absolutely treated appallingly by the justice system in the UK. In the end, it's a really tragic tale at the end, and he was only given an official pardon last year, which in itself is controversial.
Yeah, the disparity between what you've contributed to the world and society as a whole,
and how they've treated you just because you happen to be gay is an absolute tragedy. So it's a really important story to tell, and it's a really complicated story to tell just because of the nature of his work. For me, the simplifications and the things that they did to the story to make it film worthy, I couldn't work out what was true to fact and what wasn't. So many details that were so important to making the film work that just didn't happen in real life. So, for example, the Soviet spy in his team, yes, there was a Soviet spy called that name, but he'd never met Turing. He was in a completely different unit. I don't know why they needed to do that. It's dubious how much of an important figure Keira Knightley's character was in the real Alan Turing's life. Yes, they were engaged briefly, but their relationship is the real emotional heart of the film, apart from his relationship with Christopher and his first love. The whole relationship with Joan, how true that was, again, I was disappointed to read that was a question mark as well. He names his machine Christopher, like this whole the whole point about having the childhood scenes in there is to show, his early love for this friend of his at school, where he was first coming to terms with the early feelings of his sexuality, was obviously had a massive impact on him. And yes, that is a true detail from his life, but he didn't name his machine Christopher.
You've had this issue with things not
I
being
just get
true
upset
before.
when it's not. I mean, I know there's a certain amount of artistic license that has to be taken to make it a good film, as opposed to just telling the truth. I just come into true life stories that are depicted in film expecting to learn something about the whole point is you're meant to be telling their story through film, and to make their story available to a wider audience that may not have known about it, and to just make up big paint strokes of it that aren't necessarily. I just feel a bit cheated sometimes.
It's bridging that kind of divide between getting to the truth and the heart of what's happened, and just find. I know I've got no problem with omission and simplification. I do have to tell a story quicker and more efficiently. It's never going to be an accurate one-for-one retelling. If you want a true fact for fact explanation, read a book or watch a documentary. I think in many ways.
I don't agree that it would be boring though. I think there was enough stuff that happened to Alan Turing and that he did in his life to make a compelling film.
These are only things that you're having an issue with after you've come out of the film and read and kind of thought about it. Kind of as you sat and watched the film, they weren't a problem for you necessarily, were they?
I expect them to just not make up stuff, and I feel cheated if they do, even though it may have produced an enjoyable film. Benedict Cumberbatch, I thought it was interesting, and again, how much artistic license they use, I'm not sure, but they kind of. He portrayed Alan Turing as this almost semi-autistic, absolute genius mathematician and code breaker and all of that, but severely lacking in the emotional, social, like someone who's got Asperger's really just cannot pick up on social cues.
Alongside Alan Turing, these are supposedly some of the smartest minds in England.
In the country.
And it's kind of, in the country, and it's kind of the disparity between their understanding of him and a lot of things compared to his comprehension. It just seems a little bit too... The gap seems a little bit too wide. It would be fine in a different film, but it's things that started to really grate on me after a while.
I have to say that Benedict Cumberbatch, having played someone who was shown as mostly not liked by his peers, actually, he played it very... so that you actually had sympathy for him, and it could have easily swung the other way, that he was just an idiot. So, popcorns.
It's really awkward because it's 3/4 of a really fun ride, and especially the code-breaking stuff, and when they break the enigma at the end.
Yeah,
that moment is really heartwarming, and it's fun to watch, but at the same time, it feels completely false and inappropriate. For a film about a subject this important, it doesn't feel like it strikes the right sort of tone most of the time. If I just pretended it was a completely fictionalized subject, it's well written, it's well directed, it's well structured, it's fun, it kind of zips along at a good pace.
It's a good story.
But trying to square the circle of this really happened, and
this is a real person.
This was a real person. These were they're all supposed to be real people as well. This is dealing with one of the most crucial parts of World War II, and a man, as I say, who's left such an indelible imprint on this earth. I don't know, I just felt it did him a disservice, or it did the story a disservice. And I don't know if I should be judging it differently because of that, or I should just be looking at it as a film in its own right. And just,
it's hard, isn't it?
As a film, I think it's somewhere between a 7.5 and an 8. How appropriate it is, probably somewhere like a 5.5 and a 6.
I mean, I can't pretend I didn't enjoy the film. I did. I think, as you say, it's a good story. It's an engaging story. It's an important story. I just don't like how... I just think they got their artistic license out and used it a little bit too much, and I don't think they needed to. And it's a shame. It's a real shame that they felt they needed to do that. So I'm going to give it a 7.
Yeah, it just felt a bit too fluffy when I wanted something with a bit more weight to it.
Yeah.
But
I think it deserves more weight.
It's good in a lot of places, but it is still fluff.
Next week, we're off to see The Hunger Games. Hungry Games.
The Hunger Games, Mockingjay, Part 1.
I'm quite excited, actually. Although I'm also not excited. I don't know how I feel about it. Have you seen The Imitation Game? How did you feel about it? Did you like it? Did you hate it? If you want to make sure that you get notified of our Hunger Games video, click subscribe in the little red box, because that is how this shit works. Tweet us, Facebook us in the meantime, and we will see you next time. Bye. Hunger, 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 game.
Where did that come from?
I don't know, that's what came to my head.
Am I going to have to save this for next week's and drop that in somewhere?
No, I can do it again. It's fine.